This is the Agribusiness Report. I'm Tony St. James, joined today by Jon Doggett. Jon is CEO of the National Corn Growers Association, NCGA, located in Washington, D.C. Jon, it's great to see you.
Great to see you. Great to be out. I mean, I have been at home most of the time since March, but back and forth between here and our St. Louis office. But mostly I've been home.
Has this provided some opportunities to find new ways to communicate with board members, state groups, and just others in general?
You know, a lot of us didn't know what Zoom was a year ago, and certainly we've all learned a lot about Zoom and GoToMeetings and Microsoft Teams. It's been rather amazing, and I've been really surprised and really pleased to see how much a lot of our growers have embraced this technology and the ability for us to communicate better. Certainly it doesn't beat in person, but it's a good replacement until we get around to a new normal. But we've been talking a lot more over the recent years with everybody. We know it's really important to talk to our states. They're the ones who fund us. We understand that it's really, really important to sell back those checkoff dollar investments that are gathered up by the state checkoff boards and then distributed, and we get part of that. And we really need to help our state affiliates explain to that farm family at the fork of the creek what it is we're doing with that penny a bushel.
We often talk about investments that we make, whether it's personally or in our business, and wonder what that ROI is. Is when they start looking back at the return on their investment, can you point them to a positive return?
Sure, and you know, we had an interesting conversation last week with our board. The difference between NCGA and our sister organization, the Grains Council. They can, take grain sales and say that's your ROI, and ours is a little different. We are we're policy oriented, but two, we have a lot of other programs that are non-policy oriented. We can't use checkoff dollars for lobbying, but we've talked a lot about policy. We've talked a lot about lobbying over the years, but it's really important to go ahead and go back to those things in the ethanol space, some of the research that's been done, the market development that's been done on the ethanol team, the market development team, the transportation issues that are so important. Obviously it's good you need to be doing the policy side, but you also need to be doing the backup and get the facts, get the data, get the arguments that you need to pull together in order to be successful.
You mentioned ethanol. How about RFS? It's been in the headlines a bit over the last couple of years. What are you watching on the RFS?
Well, we watch the RFS every day very, very closely. It has been under attack from a number of different corners. Certainly the oil industry has never been happy with the RFS. I talked to the head of API a couple of weeks ago, and he reminded me then, as he did in the past when he worked on Capitol Hill, that they don't like mandates, and we understand that, and we're going to continue to fight to keep the RFS. The biggest attack on the RFS has been the small refinery waivers that have been granted by this administration over the last several years. And you take 4 billion plus gallons of ethanol out of the marketplace, that makes an appreciable hit on corn grind of well over 1 billion bushel of corn. So, we're very concerned about that and doing everything we can to try to recapture some of those gallons that were lost.
Maybe this is a good place to ask you about the loss of market demand, and maybe you can point back to ethanol as part of that. Maybe we point to the fact that we're dealing with COVID-19. What do you see on that front?
Well, sure, we saw a lot of demand loss because people just aren't driving. And back in April, May, and June, we just saw the ethanol industry fall off the cliff, just as the oil industry did. That demand went away. It's starting to come back slowly. Will it ever come back to where it was? We don't know. What is our society going to look like on the other side of COVID? We're seeing some people talking about folks are going to move to the suburbs instead of living in town. I've noticed over the years in running the DC office, more and more of our folks over the years, the people that work in the DC office, live in DC. Used to be they lived in the suburbs. The millennials want to work in town, live and work in town. How much is that going to change? Are we going to see folks move to the suburbs? And if they do, how are they going to get to and from work? How are they going to get to and from the store and buy groceries and those kinds of things? We don't know just yet. But certainly whatever the other side of this looks like, it's going to look a lot different than what it has ever in the past.
Perfect segue into the future of Congress. We've got elections just a few months away, but we have a Congress that has still a lot of work to do right now. When you start looking at what's happening a few blocks back to the south of here, what do you see?
Well, certainly very contentious. It's a year divisible by 2. It's a presidential election year. Those years always get crazy. More so this time than anything I've seen, and I've been around since Ronald Reagan was president in Washington, D.C. So, obviously the pandemic has ratcheted up the concerns. We've had the racial unrest and a lot of people calling for racial justice. How much more money are we going to get out of the Congress for agriculture and other purposes? Are we going to be able to get the appropriations bills done in time? No. But are we going to be able to do a continuing resolution so that the government is funded after October 1st? Or are we going to have another shutdown? And then you add the news over the weekend that Justice Ginsburg passed away, and that has thrown this thing completely wide open. If you thought it was nasty and ugly before, over the last 72 hours it has become much, much more strident, and I think we're going to pay for that. We are not seeing we're not seeing the government act like the government has acted in the past. You could complain about it in the past, but now it's pretty wild and crazy.
I'd like to give you an opportunity as we conclude here. You mentioned outreach as we started. We mentioned how things have changed. Something that, a word that we used today wasn't even around when Ronald Reagan was president, and that's the podcast. You have the opportunity to do that as well. Tell us about your podcast.
The podcast, we've done, I think now 8 podcasts. Neil Caskey, our VP of Communications, convinced me that we needed to do it. I was somewhat skeptical, but it's been a lot of fun. We're having conversations with folks that we otherwise would not have conversations with. This is not the typical outreach that a commodity organization uses, but what we wanted to do is have some conversations with some different folks and have some different ways of communicating. And this has been really interesting. I had Jackie Joyner-Kersee on a couple months ago, and the former Olympic champion. Sports Illustrated called her one of the greatest athletes of all times. But she's also a really neat person. I met her some years ago, and what she does with her outreach in her home community of East St. Louis, in a very disadvantaged community. She's built a center there that just does so many things for that community. And among the things that they do is they teach kids how to grow food. And so that they actually have an understanding of what it takes to grow food. And a lot of these kids, they're living in food deserts in East St. Louis. They come home with a sack of carrots that they raised or some onions or whatever else. You know, that's a pretty cool thing for any kid, and particularly a kid that hasn't had exposure to that. And that's just was the neatest conversation we've had in a long time. And it was really, I think it was good for all of us. And we opened a door with somebody that we really need to talk to, because she's doing so much to reach out to agriculture. We need to reach back out to her.
Finally, if we want to find out more on the podcast or find out more about what NCGA is doing, can we do that online?
Always can go to ncga.com, poke around and take a look at what we're doing. We're doing some great things. We're doing some interesting things. And we're about to do some more interesting, neat things. And we had a board meeting last week, and long conversation I had with our officer team and our incoming president, John Linder from Ohio. John has some great ideas and some things he wants to do. We're going to be doing some board development, board training. You know, we need to get, as times get tough, we're asking more and more of our volunteer leaders, and we need to help them be better leaders and offer them some training and some help in being able to have those discussions in the boardroom that they need to have.
Jon Doggett is CEO for the National Corn Growers Association, NCGA, in Washington, D.C. I'm Tony St. James. It's the Agribusiness Report.